So I'd like to understand a little better the crowd that we have here. Who is upset with the a show of hands, who is upset with the direction the country is heading? Who is upset with our education system? Great. Who wants to see Republicans take back the House and the Senate in 2022? Who is an FBI informant? Okay, only 3. That's pretty good. The FBI is not really following Attorney General Garland's directive that was just referenced. And it's easy to laugh at that, but it really is stunning, as the introduction noted, to have parents who maybe raise their voice a little like this at a school committee meeting, maybe get a little bit upset when the school committee cuts their microphone, who are seeking to protect their children, to be designated by the National School Board Association as the equivalent, read what they put out, the equivalent of domestic terrorists and hate crimes, hate criminals. And then within days, the Attorney General of the United States acts on their demands. When does that ever happen? It shows you the power of the organized educational bureaucracy in this country. They tell the Attorney General of the US what to do, and his response is, they say jump, and his response is how high? That sends a very chilling message to people. And that's really the message that I want to bring forward tonight, because I'm not a real captivating speaker, but I see what's going on. And what you are all involved in, what parents are involved in, is really a movement to save the country. This is not about what's happening in one school. It's what's happening across the country. If you wanted to devise a way to rip this country apart, what would you do differently than what they are doing? What would you do? You would teach children that the single most important aspect of their life and society is the color of their skin. You would set children against each other based on the color of their skin. You would set them against their parents based on skin color. You would set them against their country based on skin color. And that is really what is going on in the schools. People use the phrase critical race theory, and then you get the people say, oh well, we're gonna get into an argument of what the meaning of is, like the old Bill Clinton line. Well, is this critical race theory or is this not critical race theory? Oh, critical race theory is an academic theory developed at the Ivy League law schools. It's only we don't teach critical race theory. And they're right, you will never find a 3rd grade book called Critical Race Theory. What you will do is you will find an absolute obsession over skin color, and an absolute obsession over the destiny of children in the society being tied to that skin color. And make no mistake about it, when they shame white children, when they seek to tell white children that they bear a special burden in society because of their skin color, they are also shaming black children and non-white children. Because the message they are sending is that those non-white children are destined to fail in the society, that their futures are hopeless because of their skin color. And we all know that's not true. And we can't allow that ever to be true. But that is the message they are sending. The critical race theory thing is really very much tied into my history of education. So I graduated Harvard Law School in 1984, which is around the years that critical legal theory, which became critical race theory, was birthed at Harvard Law School in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So I've been aware of this essentially my whole career. And the education system was taken over by the people pushing those theories. The bulk of the students, 98%, 99%, went to law firms or business or wherever they happened to go, government. But that 1% went into academia. And when I look at the trajectory, I didn't start off in academia. I was was in private practice for over 22 years before I moved over to a law school. But if I look at my classmates and I see their trajectory, it was the most radical students who all went into academia. And one of those radical students was my classmate, who invented, or is generally credited with inventing, critical race theory. And Kimberly Crenshaw was my classmate in law school. She went into academia, and I went into law firms and cases, and most of my classmates did. And what we did for at least a generation, however many years you want to consider a generation to be, but at least for 35 years, we turned our children over to these people. We abandoned our children to a public education system which became increasingly radical. It is no surprise that the Bill Ayers of the world, the former Weather Underground, mentor of Barack Obama, went into academia and education. And they really have taken control, and it is a bad situation. I don't want to kid you about that. One of the things we do is we have written extensively and investigated extensively about the money and the groups who are pushing this. It is massive. It is hundreds of groups fueled by hundreds of millions of dollars who are devoted towards pushing variations on critical race theory to children. Now, they don't call it critical race theory. They might call it, quote unquote, anti-racism, which the way they use the term, that's possibly the greatest linguistic sleight of hand that we've ever seen, because what they advocate under the anti-racism is in fact extremely racist, and it was the most notable purveyor of that teaches at, I think it's Boston University, and makes millions of dollars off of this. They might call it equity, they might call it diversity, equity, inclusion, they might call it, what's the phrase that they're using now?
Cultural responsive teaching.
Culturally responsive teaching, that's the new one. They will never call it critical race theory, because that's become a toxic term. And that has really been taken over. We focused on one group and wrote up about one particular group called the Future of Learning. And the Future of Learning is a coalition of over 300 groups. It's funded in part by the National Education Association, which has 2 members on the Future of Learning Steering Committee. And they are pushing on this stuff, and they even have a messaging guide. So when you as a parent, you're going to hear their messaging guide when you go. They'll talk about how they're not teaching critical race theory, they're just seeking to inject truth into the classrooms. And we should trust students to learn material. And that all of this opposition is some sort of vast right-wing conspiracy. And that what we really want to do is we want to stop any discussion of racism. We don't want them to teach history. If you go to their messaging guide, these are all their talking points. They actually have a messaging guide for their membership. And so, and they are funded by major foundations, name brand foundations are pouring money into this. National Education Association, which for months and months said, well, critical race theory is not being taught in schools, you're making this up, it's not a reality, then announced that, well, it is and we support it and it should be in all 14,000 school districts. American Federation of Teachers, which said, oh, this is not happening, this is make-believe, this is some right-wing talking point, it's not happening, also announced that they are going to devote their resources to hiring lawyers to defend teachers who were disciplined for teaching critical race theory. So if it's not being taught, why do you have to hire lawyers to defend teachers for it? So there is enormous money behind this. So whenever you hear the claim that this is astroturf, that's what they use against the Tea Party, and that's what they use against this parent movement now. Understand that the people who are saying that are programmed. They have messaging guides, they have public relations consultants, they have messaging consultants, and they have hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. Yet despite that, look at how fearful they are at moms and dads who stand up at a school board committee. These people with tens and hundreds of millions of dollars behind them, with the largest teachers' unions in the country behind them, with many politicians behind them, actually shake in fear when a mom gets up there and says, I don't want you teaching my child that all that matters is his or her skin color. I don't want you doing this stuff. And they absolutely shake and they run to the Attorney General of the United States and they say, shut it down. Brand them domestic terrorists. Invoke the Patriot Act against them. Because they know they have a losing message. And they know that the parents who are objecting are right. And this is a crossover issue, and that's what scares them. This is not Democrat versus Republican, it's not conservative versus liberal, it's parental rights, and that cuts across all communities. And it's very important that when we talk about this, that while it is true that the Democratic Party is the home of this movement, that doesn't mean that all Democrats are on board with it. And that doesn't mean that we have to portray this in a partisan way. And it's certainly not a black versus white movement. One of the things that has happened is that the largest percentage of growth in homeschooling, the largest percentage of people who are pulling their kids out of the public school systems are African American parents.
Wow.
So this is why they're so scared, and this is why they want the federal government to shut it down. And this is why, if they haven't already, they're going to turn to big tech to shut down groups, because they are so afraid. And so keep that in mind, that this is really a universal concern that parents have. I don't know any parent, much less any group of parents that you could categorize by race or skin color or ethnicity, who don't want their children to learn math properly.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine teaching children, particularly non-white children, that showing your proof in math is racist and is a sign of white oppression? I mean, what damage are you doing to those children by not allowing them to properly learn math? And I don't know any group in this country that wants that. And when the light gets shown on these things, that is when they really get nervous. So let me tell you a little bit about my history. I told you about Harvard Law School. I was there at the birth of it was actually called at the time critical legal theory, and it became critical race theory. So I'm very familiar with it, and I've always followed it. I started Legal Insurrection website in 2008, and that name, of course, now is maybe a little bit controversial. It wasn't in 2008, so I always like to tell people how I got that name. And the way I got it is that I had joined Cornell Law School in 2007. I guarantee you, they never would have hired me if I had that website before they hired me. So I started it about 10 months after they hired me. And I was having dinner. I used to be a plaintiff's contingency fee securities lawyer with a client I'd won a lot of money for. And we'd never spoken politics. If you had Googled me, all you would have found is I won this case, I lost that case, I was on this bar committee, I gave this presentation, whatever it was. And even though I'd known him for many years, we never spoke politics. And having dinner with him in late August or so of 2008, and he says, who are you voting for? I said, well, I'm voting for John McCain and Sarah Palin. And when the word Sarah Palin rolled off my lips, I saw steam coming out, and we argued for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, he said, you know, you haven't changed my mind, but I've never heard anybody explain your side as clearly as you did. It was either him or his daughter said, you should start like a blog. And I didn't know what a blog was. I didn't follow blogs. So I went to Google Blogger because it was free and really basic. And I said, okay, now I need a name. Well, what am I feeling? Like word association. And the word insurrection came to my mind. Now, whoever's taking notes here, that's not the end of the story. And I looked it up, and an insurrection by definition is illegal. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I'm a law professor now. Maybe a name that's illegal isn't the best thing, so I'll call it legal insurrection, which actually is a contradiction in terms. And that's how I got the name. And over time, we grew. I was alone on this blog for a couple of years, got a lot of notoriety. One thing that's very interesting, my first post was October 12th of 2008. By the end of October, the law school was already getting emails from people who wanted me fired within 3 weeks. And that kept up a steady pace for several years. Not every day or every week, but enough that looking back, I can say it was kind of steady. And what was I saying? I was basically saying mainstream conservative stuff, critiques of Obama and Obamacare and things like that. Nothing crazy. And that kept up. People threatened to boycott the law school, organize boycotts if they didn't get rid of me. One year, threats were such that the university assigned a university police detective to accompany me to graduation because they were afraid of a disruption. And I look back on it, and who was doing this? I mean, a lot of it was anonymous, but a lot of it wasn't. They used their real names and their regular emails because they were so unafraid of trying to get me fired or harassing people, okay, in the law school, how they have to get rid of me. And you know, I'd done a lot on the anti-Israel movement. These weren't, you know, anti-Israel activists, okay? These weren't anarchists. These weren't communists. These were mainstream Obama-supporting liberals who were so secure in their position that they didn't mind using their own names to try to get me fired. And that continued for many years. And as a website, we continued to grow, and we got involved at that time. We don't anymore because we're a 501c3, but we got involved in politics. We were very involved in Scott Brown's first race against Martha Coakley. We were the only one really on the ground covering it. And in December, I'm like kind of screaming to people, you know, this thing's winnable. And everybody's, no, the last poll is down 25 points. No, this is actually winnable. And then we got very involved in his second run, which he lost to Elizabeth Warren. And we were extremely involved in that and extremely involved in documenting our problems. The other website you need to go to, which I founded in 2013, is called ElizabethWarrenWiki.org. ElizabethWarrenWiki.org. We pulled together, she won, we pulled together all the research we did, all the research the Cherokee genealogist did, proving that she has no Native American heritage. We pulled all of this stuff together, and I said, I can't just let this disappear into the internet. So we created a website that looks like Wikipedia, and it's ElizabethWarrenWiki.org with absolutely devastating takedowns of a lot of her positions and exposés on things that most people don't know about her. And the funny thing is that it became a huge hit with Bernie Sanders supporters during the 2020 election cycle because it was so well documented. And everything was new, everything was sourced. And whenever possible, we used mainstream sources, not our own, not quote-unquote right-wing sources. Nobody has ever pointed to a single fact on that website, which is quite extensive, that we got wrong. And that is kind of what we do. We're a very deep research entity. We became a 501c3 in 2018 and actually launched in 2019. And then we created criticalrace.org, which we rolled out in the first week of February of this year, actually. It seems like it was longer ago. And why did we do that? Well, I've been following a lot of different politics sort of things and issues involving race, et cetera, and there was attempts to get me fired in June of 2020 because I was critical of the rioting and the looting that took place after George Floyd's death. And I had the temerity to point out a historical truth, which is that hands up, don't shoot, which became the signature slogan of the Black Lives Matter movement, actually is a fabrication. Michael Brown did not have his hands up, and we was not saying don't shoot when he was shot by the police in Ferguson in 2014, but that has become the designated slogan. In fact, he punched a policeman in the face and tried to steal his weapon, and that's why he was shot dead. And so those two things, kind of cancel culture, came down on me. But then in July of 2020, the president of Cornell University announced that we were going to become essentially, quote unquote, anti-racist campus. And I hadn't really heard that phrase before. Well, I consider myself anti-racist. I think the vast majority of people in the country do. But I didn't really understand what she meant by it. And she assigned, or she promoted, a book that was going to be the subject for students of summer reading and would be the subject then of discussion groups when they returned to campus. And it was made available to people free. If you had a Cornell ID, you could log in and you could read it online. And that book was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibrahim Kendi. And that was my first exposure. And I start reading this thing. I was like, oh my God, this is like horrible. This is actually advocating discrimination. This is advocating racial discrimination. His most famous line, I think, is current discrimination to remedy past discrimination, future discrimination to remedy current discrimination. So I'm reading this and saying, this is pretty awful. And so we began to research it. We have researchers who work for us. And at first I was going to write an op-ed or an article. And then we began to realize, you know, this is actually all over the place. This is everywhere. And so, but we're just researching it. And then in the fall of, early September of 2020, pursuant to the president's guidance that we were to become an anti-racist campus, several hundred faculty, students, and staff signed a set of demands as to what they believed the president's anti-racism initiative should look like on campus. And some of the things they advocated were outright unlawful under the anti-discrimination laws, like hiring based on race, promotion based on race. And that's when we decided as a group, we said, you know what, this is out of control. I mean, you have some prominent professors at Cornell University. Maybe you haven't heard of them, but at least on campus they're prominent. Signing on to a document like this. This is really bad. So we decided as a foundation we would create a website. It took us some time to do the research, and our goal was to have it live before the election. And it didn't work out. We ran into troubles with the database that we were creating. And we said, okay, you know, the election will be over. Maybe early December. It should be quiet after the election. and then it didn't quite get quiet, and then we said, well, okay, you know, maybe as we move into mid-December or early January, the news cycle won't be so crazy and we can actually get a little bit of attention here, and obviously that didn't happen. And then we found a sweet spot between the inauguration and the second impeachment. This is how crazy the world is. Between the inauguration and the second impeachment of somebody who's no longer president, okay? We found that week when the news was not completely insane. And we rolled out the website. I was very fortunate enough to have it announced on Tucker Carlson's show on a Thursday night at 8:30. And we still thought this would just be a nice little project of the Legal Insurrection Foundation. You know, we'll do it, we'll get a little bit of attention, and we'll move on. Between 8:30 and midnight, we had 400,000 visits to the website. And understand that this is not, if you're familiar, I never go there anymore, but if you're called like Drudge, okay, it's not like a Drudge link where you just click on something and it takes you to a website. People actually had to type into their browser criticalrace.org. And Tucker was very kind and said it 3 or 4 times. I said it 3 or 4 times. And by the next day we had 1 million visits. And then we knew we were on to something here. What was going to be a little project of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, we tapped into something going on in this country that we had no idea was going on. And since then, that movement I call it a liberation movement, to liberate our education system from this ideology, has grown leaps and bounds. A lot of new groups have come into it, and I always say be careful about that, because where there's donor money and there's money, there will be people who come in to scoop it up. But for the most part, from what I've observed, most of the people involved are legitimately interested. A lot of the groups are run by mothers, seem to be more prominent than fathers. Mothers seem to be leading this movement. I mean, this is a movement pretty much of mothers defending their children. And it is extremely, extremely powerful. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, what can we do? How do we face off against this? Because it seems like all the forces are aligned against us. Well, the one thing you can do is you can support each other. When you have a teacher or a coach or somebody else who is fired or disciplined or attacked, reach out to them, support each other. As somebody who was the focus of a firestorm at Cornell Law School in June of 2020, those emails of support are really helpful. And so support each other. Run for school board, run for school committee, run for PTA, whatever you can do. I don't care what you do, but do something. And when you have millions, maybe tens of millions of people willing to do something, that becomes very powerful. And so I think that it's an all hands on deck sort of thing. And different people have different strengths. Somebody might not want to put themselves out there and have to deal with the false accusations that will be made against them. And it's very painful when you're subjected to those, because you know you're not what they're claiming, okay? That it's almost like an out-of-body experience. I can tell you, like, okay, they're talking about this really, really horrible person, and then you realize they're talking about you, okay? But do something. I don't really care what it is. Support candidates who support your positions. Network with Democrats who agree with you on this issue. They may disagree with you on everything else, but on this issue you can cross over. Police your own movement. I saw this with the Tea Party, and we're seeing it now in the way people are trying to demonize this movement. We were kind of a Tea Party blog, never affiliated with any group, but we started in the fall of 2008, which was kind of at the start of the Tea Party movement. So I followed the Tea Party movement, and what you had is you could have 4,000 people at a rally with 1,500 signs. They would find the one crazy sign, and that would be plastered all over TV. And you know what? We were able to document that some of those were plants. Some of those were people they sent to rallies so that they could get photos and video of them that would then dominate the news cycle. You probably don't recall, but after she lost the election, Sarah Palin started a website and a website called Democratic Underground, which I think still exists, organized a movement to go to her website and plant racist comments in the comment section. Why? So they could say, look who her supporters are. So if you're going to have a Facebook group and somebody starts talking trash, kick them out. Yeah. Okay? Kick them right out. If they show up at a meeting and they start talking trash, kick them out. You have to self-police. So that's another sort of warning sign. Don't give up. They want you to give up. They want you to feel hopeless. But look around this room, go to any school board meeting, start Facebook groups, go to Facebook groups. There are more of you than there are union officials. Okay? There are more of you than there are academics pushing this stuff. They may have more money, okay, and I don't want to underestimate the forces behind this and the money behind this, coming from billionaires whose names you know. But there are more of you. And so keep it up, do something, get active, make this a crossover issue. and never, never, ever let them turn you against each other, okay? Because that's what they're going to try to do. So I hope I haven't disappointed you, but what I'm really interested in is hearing questions and feedback, because that's what I like to do more than anything.
Continue to film questions.